Hello, I'm Jeb Livingston, the historian with the Hawaiian Railway Society. We've been doing a number of these programs, and recently we talked about Hawaiian tramways, which was a mule or horse-drawn street railway system here in Honolulu. Hawaiian tramways in 1900 had 12 miles of operable track in the streets, and omnibuses and carriages for hire provided most of the transportation outside of the 12 miles of track. In 1900, the Honolulu Rapid Transit and Land Company was fighting for its charter with the idea to replace the Hawaiian tramways mule-drawn with electrically driven trolley cars. But they were not the first electric railway in Hawaii. That honor belongs to the Pacific Heights Railway, which was a 2.5 mile long line built on a 6% grade by Charles S. Deskey. Now, Deskey was an entrepreneur and developer, and since the bulk of Honolulu was already well settled, all of the level areas being taken by houses, businesses, he was developing the area just outside Honolulu, Pacific Heights. To make transportation to and from the area and the lots that were available, he built this little railway. In 1901, he purchased two streetcars, trolley cars, built by the Holman Company in California, equipped with Brill trucks, and commenced operations late in 1901, sporadically, and then actually operated regularly in 1902. Unfortunately, there is only one photograph that I am aware of this particular operation. I'm sure there might be more, but we have no idea where they are located. If you have a little treasure trove of family photographs and one of these cars is in there, please contact the Hawaiian Railway Society. We would love to add it to the collection. Well, these two little cars, built by Holman, were 8 benches and carried 32 passengers. Deskey, like so many others before him, especially in the transportation business, built a dance pavilion at the upper reaches of Pacific Heights, which was very popular, and dances were held twice a week and every evening of a holiday. This little line of 2.5 miles cost 5 cents to ride, and actually was self-sufficient. It actually paid for its own operation. Unfortunately, however, sales of the lots were not going as well as anticipated, and in 1905 Deskey was foreclosed upon and the railway dismantled. We have no idea what happened to the equipment, and this included the 2 passenger cars, and he had also had 2 freight cars built in the OR&L shops to haul construction materials up to 6% grade up to the building sites. It was sold in 1905 to the Honolulu Rapid Transit, which at the time that Deskey started this was not in existence. And as I said, disposition of the equipment was unknown. However, the rails that were taken up were actually used in the Ko'olau Railway. Now, the Honolulu Rapid Transit and Land Company began operations on the 31st of August, 1901. They operated at the same time that Hawaiian Tramways was still operating, and there was a constant battle between the two companies. The period of construction was known as the Streetcar Wars, where the competing teams or crews, construction crews of each company, would work laying track during the day, and then the other company's crews would come up and rip it up at nighttime. This went on for a while, and of course litigation ensued. But a couple of years later, the Honolulu Rapid Transit and Land Company bought out the Hawaiian Tramways. I think the total price at auction was something close to about $1,000. So not very lucrative for them. Initially, the HRT, Honolulu Rapid Transit, concentrated their efforts in and around central Honolulu. They operated a number of cars, and they were mostly small, like this little four-wheel open car. Now, being an open car, it suited the weather in Hawaii beautifully. And there were side curtains that could be pulled down in the event of rain. However, they were limited as to the number of people, and they were limited by the power plant. The power plant could only provide sufficient power for between 4 and 6 streetcars at a time. So during peak operating hours, the cars moved more slowly, and they had some difficulty in providing the service that they wanted to. They increased the size of the power plant, and one of the things they did was shift from coal to oil, and they continued to build lines out into other areas. Now in downtown, you can see there's very little traffic here, but the streetcars ran either to the right or directly down the center of the streets. The sides of the rails and the center of the rails were filled with blocks of wood initially, to prevent a smooth passage for carriages, omnibuses, and people walking. This wasn't totally satisfactory to everybody, especially if your carriage wheel happened to drop into the guideway, and it could cause damage to the carriage, throw the horse on the ground, and throw the people out of the carriage. However, they continued to build branches into Kaimuki and into Manoa, which at the time were undeveloped. And they also built branches into Waikiki, Fort Shafter, and Nuuanu Valley. They were out into the what is then country, what is now, and I'm not absolutely sure, but I believe this photograph was in Nuuanu. The surrounding area appears that way. Many of these old photographs are not well marked. Now you see this car is a little larger, and it appears to have sides on it. So this is going to be a later issue, but it still has the deck roof, which brings it to be an earlier car. By going to Fort Shafter, service members at the Army post could run to downtown Honolulu easily, and they were actually somewhat in competition with the OR&L. Now the facilities in Honolulu included the powerhouse and car barn, and you can see part of the powerhouse in the background, office spaces in the foreground, and the car barn is in the background. You can barely make out a number of streetcars that are parked in rows. This was a little later on, and the fleet had grown considerably. A little better picture of the car barn. It shows the size of it better. The powerhouse again in the background. And this is where the cars were repaired, worked on, and where the HRT had their shops. Now we've talked briefly in other programs about the OR&L shops and their ability to build passenger cars and freight cars to a very high degree of craftsmanship. Well, HRT had that same capability. And as time progressed, these small open cars and the small California convertible cars with single trucks, a number of them were rebuilt into two-truck cars. Now, a two-truck car of that nature is similar to these. This particular car was built in the Honolulu Rapid Transit shops from two single truck cars. The ends were cut off each of the single truck cars and then joined to make one large car. These cars were significant in that it significantly increased the passenger carrying capability. This particular photograph shows the Newsboy special. Every year, the Honolulu Star Bulletin would treat all of their newsboys to a special outing, and they were carried by the streetcars. And this is one of those times. In addition to the special outings of the newsboys, HRT had built the aquarium. People don't always think about that or realize it, but the aquarium in Waikiki was built by the Honolulu Rapid Transit and Land Company. It was built so that passengers had some place to go on a weekend. People didn't work on Sundays. A lot of them did work on Saturdays. So to keep revenue up and to keep passenger traffic flowing, the aquarium was built and passengers carried from downtown Honolulu or as far as Fort Shafter to the aquarium and right across from Kapiolani Park. Well, there was also a ball field out in that area. Unfortunately, the name escapes me at the moment, but it was very popular. Sports were extremely important at that time. We didn't have iPhones and internet and everything else, so you made your entertainment on your own. And a number of companies, the military, excuse me, all had baseball teams, football teams, bowling teams. There were all kinds of teams. HRT had their own teams. The OR&L had their teams. So an afternoon's entertainment could be 3, 4, or more baseball games, multiple games going on simultaneously, and the people had to get to and from the ballpark. They went by streetcar. There were a few other pictures of this nature, but this one I think is one of the most significant. You can see here are 3 large double truck streetcars, absolutely jam-packed with people. These special trains would run continually all day long, of course, with the greatest crush coming at the end of the day. Based on the shadows and all in this picture, this is probably close to midday, and they are packed. Now, I mentioned that the Honolulu Rapid Transit ran to Fort Shafter. The line from downtown Honolulu to Fort Shafter essentially paralleled the OR&L right-of-way. Under the franchise that the HRT operated, they had an opportunity to extend an electric line with a different company further than Fort Shafter. So they developed a new company named Pearl Harbor Traction Company. It was planned to run through Fort Shafter to Pearl Harbor. And this was about 1909 that this plan came up. There were many, many delays encountered in execution of this, the first of which was getting the Army's permission to transit through government property with a interurban, in this case, not a streetcar, but an interurban line. HRT desperately wanted to do this because it would have given them an additional route into Pearl Harbor in direct competition with the ORNL. They had tracks that went down into Honolulu Harbor and onto at least 2 piers, so they could have operated freight traffic and passenger traffic from downtown Honolulu directly to Pearl Harbor in direct competition. The plan never came to fruition, although it remained on the books and on paper for many, many years. The ORNL prevailed. The Pearl Harbor Traction Company could not get permission to cross through Fort Shafter, and that particular electric railroad idea died without ever coming to fruition. But besides hauling passengers, the Honolulu Rapid Transit also did haul freight. They had less than carload freight. They had what was termed a freight motor. Didn't haul any passengers. It was essentially an electric boxcar. Unfortunately, no photographs of those particular cars exist. They also had a prison car for transporting prisoners to and from court, from the territorial prison to and from court. And again, unfortunately, no photographs of those cars exist. They did have some work equipment, and among those were a couple of what they called flat motors. Here's a flat motor down by Pier 5 in Honolulu Harbor. The flat motor is all the way to the left. You can see a little house on each end. That's where the motorman operated. And then the 2 flat cars behind. This was hauling sand from a barge. The barge is just barely visible in the water. And they would haul sand to construction sites, both for HRT construction and for other contractors' construction needs. These particular flat motors, we don't really have a lot of information on, but if you notice the flat cars behind them, it may be difficult to see, but the ends of those cars are rounded. Because of the extremely tight radiuses of a street railway, which could be down to 40 feet, the ends of the equipment had to be rounded so that when 2 cars went around the same corner together, the edges of the flat cars would not touch and derail the vehicles while turning. While very common in the mainland, this is one of the few instances, well, actually the only instance in Hawaii of an electric street railway system. Now, there were numerous attempts to build a street railway system in Hilo, all of which fell short and were never constructed. This is a rather poor picture of construction along King Street. You can see the track being constructed to the right. That's all been excavated out, and to the left is a freight motor. And in this case, instead of hauling a flat car with bins of sand, it is moving a dump car. Again, we don't know how many dump cars the company had or all of their uses. We do know they were used in fort construction. And there are some interesting stories about runaway cars on steep grades and the motormen having to really risk their life to get things back under control. An example of the dump car, small 4-wheel, and what appears to be a platform on top was actually hinged. It could tip either to the left or to the right and dump sand, gravel, or whatever material it was carrying to either side of the track. the HRT used this type of construction in building all of their later track. Another idea that came about for an electric railway, and again one that did not come to fruition, was in 1919. In 1919, the Baldwin Locomotive Company sent a proposal to the Oahu Railway and Land Company to electrify the Wahiawa branch. Now, the Wahiawa branch was built in 1904 and had a 3% ruling grade. That may not sound like much for an automobile, but for a steam locomotive, that is a steep grade. If you think back, the grade at Pacific Heights Railway was 6%, but an electric trolley car could easily handle the 6% grade since they were small and very light and overpowered for their weight. Well, moving pineapple up and down the Wahiawa branch took more than one locomotive in most instances. It was very common to have locomotives double-headed and even triple-headed. In doing that, you have a great deal of expense. You've got fuel for 2 or 3 locomotives. You've got crews for 2 or 3 locomotives. You've got wear and tear. You have less available equipment should it be needed elsewhere. And it was slow. So Baldwin made the suggestion to the ORNL to electrify that branch. Now, Baldwin used Westinghouse electrical equipment in their locomotives, and Hawaiian Electric was at the time the Westinghouse representative here in Hawaii. So they also joined in the proposal. And what Baldwin and Westinghouse and Hawaiian Electric proposed was building an electrified, essentially 7 to 9 mile branch line up Wahiawa with 1 large power station, rotary converters, and 3 50-ton Baldwin electric locomotives. This is what the locomotive recommended would have looked like had it actually been purchased and put in use. These are highly efficient, very high traction, and could easily have pulled the pineapple trains both up and down, loaded, unloaded, at a much greater speed than the currently, or the then in use steam locomotives. The ORNL didn't act on this, but they did recognize that they needed more tractive effort to get up to 3% grade. And that's when in 1925 they purchased 2 3-truck Shay locomotives, geared locomotives, and I believe we've spoken about this once before. They have tremendous tractive effort. They can climb grades well in excess of 3%, but they are exceedingly slow. And because they were so slow, they were not popular and were very soon sidelined and placed on the rib track and not used. By 1923, the Honolulu Rapid Transit was carrying 20 million passengers a year. This rate declined in the 20s and 30s as personal vehicles became more and more predominant, and buses also took over a lot of routes. A bus not tied by rail could go anywhere in the city at any time. Now, in 1915, the Honolulu Rapid Transit actually started using some buses to reach areas where they had not laid track. But they also continued with increasing the size of their fleet. This is a much more modern open car. The roof kind of gives it away. This one, I believe, was built by Brill. I'm not absolutely sure, I don't remember. But it is it is most common of the later cars of the HRT, and then a number of these cars, or some number of these cars, and new cars were purchased that were totally enclosed. These are the ones that a lot of people, if you remember the streetcars, this is the kind of car that would probably come to mind. By 1935, the HRT was operating 50 streetcars, but they were also operating 45 trackless trolleys. Now, a trackless trolley is simply a bus with an electric motor. To quote Yogi Berra, deja vu all over again. Here we are going to electric vehicles, and here we had them back in the 30s. The last streetcar ran in 1941, with trackless trolleys taking over all of the service after that point. On 22 June 1957, the last electric trackless trolley turned its last mile, replaced by diesel buses. Eventually, within a few more years, the HRT was taken over by the city and county, and now is the bus. So what we ride today had its roots with the Honolulu Rapid Transit and the streetcar systems. At its highlight, the streetcar system was extensive. Downtown Honolulu, out to Diamond Head, Fort Shafter. You could get anywhere by taking the trolley. I hope you enjoyed this little tidbit. There are more to come. If you have any suggestions for particular topics, send them to me at Hawaiian Railway. We'll be happy to address them and see what we can come up with.